All right, I'm now on page 120. How can we describe atoms? Okay. Different combinations of protons, neutrons, and electrons produce atoms with different properties. Okay, and it's important that you understand that the number of each kind of particle within an atom determines its unique properties. This is a major concept. It's the number of protons that identifies what element you have. All atoms with 6 protons are carbon atoms. All atoms with 13 protons are aluminum atoms, etc. Okay? The number of electrons and the number of neutrons does not identify the element, only the protons. Okay? All right. So down here where it says by atomic number, the number of protons distinguishes the atoms of one element from the atoms of another. For example, every hydrogen atom contains 1 proton. Every carbon atom has exactly 6 protons in its nucleus. The number of protons in the nucleus of an atom is the atomic number of that atom. So for instance, hydrogen has an atomic number of 1. Carbon has an atomic number of 6 because it has 6 protons. Hydrogen has an atomic number of 1 because its nucleus only has 1 proton. How are 2 atoms of the same element alike? Well, they are alike because they will always have the same number of protons. They won't necessarily have the same number of electrons or the same number of neutrons, but they will have the same number of protons. Okay, so we have described atoms by atomic number. We can also describe atoms by their mass number. Okay, it's important to remember the atoms of a certain element always have the same number of protons, but they don't always have the same number of electrons or neutrons. Okay, so think of chlorine atoms. It says, for example, all chlorine atoms have 17 protons, but some chlorine atoms have 18 neutrons. Other chlorine atoms have 20 neutrons. These 2 types of chlorine atoms are called isotopes. Okay, and I wrote up here, isotopes, it's kind of like different varieties. Okay, isotopes are atoms of the same element that have different numbers of neutrons. The total number of protons and neutrons in an atom's nucleus is its mass number. Different isotopes of chlorine have different mass numbers. Okay? So for instance, what is the mass number of a chlorine atom that contains 18 neutrons? Well, remember that mass number is protons plus neutrons. So in that particular atom, you're going to have 17 protons, because it's chlorine, plus 18 neutrons. 17 plus 18 gives you a mass of 35. But for instance, if you had a chlorine atom that had 20 neutrons, you'd have 17 protons plus 20 neutrons, and that one would have a mass of 37. Okay? Remember that the atomic number is the number of protons. In this illustration, you have 2 protons. The atomic number is 2. The mass number is the number of protons plus neutrons. So we have 2 protons, 2 neutrons for a mass of 4. Why don't we consider electrons? Well, if you remember from the previous screencast, electrons have almost no mass. They're very, very, very small compared to protons and neutrons. So the only 2 things we consider when we're thinking about atomic mass are the things that have mass, a considerable amount of mass, and that's protons and neutrons. So mass number is protons plus neutrons. Okay, that brings us to the end of lesson 1. And so I'm going to just give you some information on what it is you're going to need to do with this lesson in order to earn full credit. First of all, be sure to complete the vocabulary, the 8 vocabulary words that were on page 113. You can do those either on a separate sheet of paper and staple them, or you can do them in this notes section. You may want to use the notes section for this set of notes, which you do need to write down. It's sort of the history of the atomic model. What were Democritus's contribution, Dalton, Thomson, Rutherford, Bohr, Chadwick, and what is the current theory. Then, within the lesson itself, make sure that you answer questions 5, 9, 10, 12, 14, and then 15 through 18. Also, make sure that you complete the lesson review, questions 1 through 4 and questions 6 through 11. Okay, so I will let you guys take a glance at this so that you can get all of that recorded on a piece of paper or on the back of your lesson, because that is part of the assignment. Okay, also, I added the little NT for not true to remind you that 2 of Dalton's statements that he made are statements that we have since found out to be false. So just point those out. All right, that does it for lesson 1.